At my daughter's wedding, a waiter asked, "Ma'am, are you ready to be seated?" My daughter laughed. "Please don't seat her near the pictures. That's the situation we've put up with." My cheek burned. I signed the guest book anyway. M.T. Hart, 2 loops on the G. The groom's father froze. "Do you sign legal documents like that?" "On paper, yes. In real life, I'm Maggie." He swallowed. Heartline Properties Fund." The room went silent. I kissed the air beside my daughter's cheek and left before the toasts. Money didn't change my taste. It changed my posture. You want the rest? Here it is. 2 weeks later, the newlyweds were $180,000 short. My daughter came to my tiny apartment, still wearing champagne-colored pride. She said, "I'm sorry, Mom. We're in a bind." I didn't hand over cash. I handed over rules. A public apology where she hurt me, 6 months serving at the women's shelter, budget, credit counseling, no showy posts, pay down every dollar, and I match it. She stared at the paper. "Mom, that's humiliating." I said, "So was your sentence. If harm is public, healing is public." She had a choice: take my deal or keep pretending. And that was before a burst pipe, a bank audit, a room full of keys, and a father-in-law who learned what my signature really means. Want to know what she chose? Keep listening. I drove home the long way, past the old firehouse where Tom used to laugh at the exact wrong jokes, and out toward the river where the geese are large enough to register as opposition. I could hear the scrape of my own breathing. The city settled its evening weight around me like a quilt that still smells a little like smoke. People will tell you that money changes you. They are not wrong, but it is not the way they think. Money changed my posture, not my taste. It made room in my head for other people's mistakes. It taught me that dignity is a loan you sometimes extend to others who haven't earned it yet. I didn't go to college for finance. I went for a while to Sinclair because I like being around the noise of learning. I learned what I know from the place where a pipe leaks onto a receipt. After Tom died, the life insurance was not the kind you read about in glossy brochures. It was the kind where the number looks polite until you put it next to rent and braces and the price of a used washing machine that pumps out once and then refuses every negotiation. I learned cap rates because someone had written the phrase "on a page" stapled to the back of an eviction notice. I learned leverage because a slanted porch taught me how to put a 2x4 in the right place and coax something heavy to sit right. I learned cash flow from the morning shift at Marion's Piazza, rolling quarters until my fingertips smelled like metal and tomato. The first property I bought was not the dream any person photographs. It was a small duplex on the street that changes names halfway through. The landlord was tired and said his back hurt, and if someone would pay the back taxes, he'd sleep better. I took a day off and went to the Montgomery County building and asked the clerk the same question 8 different ways until she set her coffee down and said, "Honey, are you trying to buy this note or marry it?" She smiled when she said it. She wore one of those sweaters you only see on people who are kind on purpose. I bought the note. The duplex leaned like a ship in a stiff wind, but I jacked it and shimmed it and planted flowers in front that only grow halfway before someone's dog developed a taste for them. They're trial and error and the sort of stubbornness that looks rude until it succeeds. I built Heartline, a small company with a big appetite for buildings other people had declared unlovable. I learned which painters show up, which plumbers answer after midnight, and which electricians double-check their own work so you don't have to carry a fire extinguisher in your heart.
I kept my head down because it fit me and because I did not want to build a life that required makeup every day. The world teaches some of us to be invisible. It is not always a punishment. Sometimes it's just better lighting for the job at hand.
The one person I more or less hid the whole thing from was my daughter. I hid it not because she couldn't know, but because I didn't yet know how to be a woman who wore two truths at once. Lila wanted napkins that matched chairs. She wanted plates that made a statement. She wanted statements. I wanted a sink that didn't list left and a lop that turned without jiggling. We loved each other around that gap. That is possible, though it is not recommended if you can help it. 2 weeks before the wedding, I closed a credit facility with First Riverbank for $40 million to turn an old factory into apartments people who work hard can actually afford. I signed the documents the way lawyers like them signed, every page initialed, a fountain pen insisted upon because clients like the look of ink that has weight. On the signature line, I wrote, M.T. Hart. Across the table, Arthur West's voice came through the speaker from his office downtown, balanced and boring exactly the way executives want it. Boring is what you want from a bank and from a surgeon. Boring means they will not torture life for sport. We never met in person. I could have been a ghost with a checking account. He saw my signature then, though, and when he saw it again in his son's wedding guest book, he knew he'd seen that G before. I did not sleep well the night of the wedding. If the world had been louder, I might have, but the quiet was full of friendlier ghosts than usual. My phone lit up before the sun. It was Lila, first with glitter sprinkled over a text. "Mom, you look so pretty. Can we chat?" And then with real words that smelled like anxiety. "Did you invest in something through Dad's bank? What is Hart line?" People spell it like a fishing tool. I don't correct them unless paperwork is involved. I did what I always do when a night bleeds into a morning. I put one foot on the hardwood floor and waited for the hum of the refrigerator. Simple appliances, reliable sounds. I put on my old jeans and went out for coffee at UDF because the girl who works the early shift wears earrings her grandmother handed down and asks after my neighbor's cat like we're in a small town, which in some ways we are. Then I drove out to Eastwood, where the men from Local 1410 were arguing about joist hangers like the fate of the city depended on them, which in some tiny way it did. Ray, my foreman, lifted 2 fingers in greeting. Manny the plumber nodded without looking up. You can tell which trades like you because they keep talking while you arrive. If they stop, you interrupt their work just by existing. My men did not stop. At the county building, I dropped off a deposit for a permit and slid a bag of cinnamon rolls across the counter to the clerk who helps me more than her job description requires. She said, "You look tired," and then said, "You also look like someone who knows why she's tired." If I ever become one of those women who do interviews, I'll say that line and pretend it's mine. The trick is to give credit to the people who feed you sentences. On Thursday night, Lila showed up at my apartment with her husband, Evan. She wore a blouse the color of champagne you drink to be seen drinking it. She looked around my little living room like it was a museum of what not to do. I had an ottoman that cost $4 because 2 of the buttons were missing. I liked it better that way. She said, "Mom, why didn't you tell me you own this company?" She didn't sit until she remembered you can sit and still be in control. She perched. I said, "Because you were busy. I put tea into the 2 mugs I bought where she had braces. Back then, I made her smoothies with spinach hidden in bananas and called them monster shakes, and she giggled until it was a medical condition." She tried again. "Mr. West told me you're developing the Eastwood factory. He showed me your signature." Her eyes dropped to my left hand where there is a tiny white dent from the years I wore a ring that meant something. It matches. We buy buildings other people can't love yet. We make them something families can live in. I shrugged. That's most of it. It's not most of it, she said. She laughed, brand new and sharp. And we, Evan and I, are in a small bind. Not a disaster, she added quickly, because her pride wants to get to the door first. Just about $180,000 of a bind. Venue overages, some vendor issues, and we need to swap my car lease because the photos... She stopped. Shame gets between a sentence and its end like a door somebody closed in the wind. I said, "You told a waiter not to seat me by the pictures. You called me a situation." Her chin trembled. She said it. I was nervous and trying to act like I belonged. I picked the wrong things when I'm scared. She folded and unfolded the napkin I had given her like she was practicing origami under duress. I'm so sorry. I accepted the apology in the way you accept something breakable. Careful, not showy. I'll help, I said, but not with cash. If you want cash, you can ask Arthur after you're done pretending you humiliated me in front of his friends. I reached into a drawer and took out an envelope I had labeled a month earlier with something that would either turn out to be love or control, depending on the day you ask me about it. If you want me, you get me. Me comes with rules. She opened the envelope. She read the single page out loud as if reading would change the content. Public apology. At the VFW hall to the same general group that heard the insult. Service for 6 months at the Haven, the women's shelter on Edwin C. Moses. Whatever the director needs, not whatever looks best. Certified credit counseling, a written budget, all credit cards cut, and 6 months of on-time payments. At the 6-month mark, I would match every dollar she had paid down, up to $90,000. No Instagram, no hair bows on virtue. She looked up. Mom, that is humiliating. So is the sentence you said. Humiliation is a tool. If used correctly, it sands the rough corners off pride. She blinked. She nodded. She shook her head. She nodded again, and I watched something in her loosen that had been clenched so long it thought it was a bone. 2 days later, after a morning when my coffee tasted like mud and duty, there was a knock on my door. Arthur West stood there with bakery boxes from a place that wraps their lemon bars like jewelry. He looked like a person practicing humility. I appreciated the effort. I owe you an apology, he said. I laughed at that table. Not loudly, but men like me learn to make our laughter look like it belongs to someone else. I know the difference between a laugh and a cough. And I need to tell you something that puts us in a pickle. He set the boxes on my table and took a breath that sounded as if it had to travel up a hill. Your fund bought my son's mortgage when it traded last week. I saw it cross my desk. He doesn't know. I recused myself the second I caught my own reflection. I will not be the one to tell him, but I can't sit here and keep it from you. I folded the little paper that had been wrapped around the lemon bars. I will not foreclose on newlyweds. That is not my business. My business is roofs that keep out rain and windows that open and close without a fight. If they do the work, the note will sit like a cat on a sunny rug. He let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so close to a prayer. Thank you. We ate lemon bars and said very little. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is chew. The following Thursday, Leela stood at the front of the VFW hall where the carpet had known older feet and the ceiling tiles had soaked up small wars and laughter. The same general crowd that had been at the rehearsal dinner sat with their bingo cards and the men who call numbers like it's a sacred duty. Leela asked for the microphone and was given it. Sound systems have a way of testing your resolve. She said, "At my wedding, I asked a waiter to seat my mother away from the pictures because I was embarrassed of her dress. That was cruel and wrong. My mother has spent years helping families in this city keep a roof over their heads. I am sorry for what I did and for the ways I have been small. I'm asking for grace and for the chance to be the kind of daughter who deserves it." There was no swell of strings. There were bingo cards and the squeak of a folding chair leg, and one woman from the Haven who clapped first because she knows how much it costs to be brave. The rest of the room followed, uncoordinated and sincere. We didn't hug. That kind of hug needs a longer runway. On Monday, Leela showed up at the Haven at 6 a.m. in jeans and a ponytail and no nails to break. The director, a woman named Carol who keeps her voice low because she spends her days talking to people whose nerves are frayed to glitter, handed her a list. Dishes, linens. The little boy in the yellow t-shirt never sits still, so read to him until he does. When Leela overstuffed the washer and the machine rattled like a truck with a loose muffler, she apologized and stayed late to redo it. She texted me after her shift.
I learned how to sort whites from everything else, like a grown-up. I sent back a thumbs up and the address of Consumer Credit Counseling, and she made the appointment and showed me the paper with their logo and an arrow pointing to her next meeting.
She and Evan sold the SUV that had a monthly payment larger than my first rent check and bought a dented Civic with upholstery that smelled faintly of hope. She listed dresses on the internet and folded $300 in cash into an envelope labeled groceries, like people did before everything became pretend. She called a credit card company and said, "I can't afford this. What can you offer me?" The man on the phone adjusted his script. It is funny how the world changes its tone when you refuse to play the part it assigned you. Every week, she sent me a picture of a spreadsheet, and I matched the payments exactly. On the days she slid, I did not match. Rules are not mean. They are rails on the edges of a bridge you intend to cross. At the bank, Arthur behaved like a person who understands the words conflict of interest. He sat 2 rows back when our audit got tense and let a junior person, who was not a junior in brain, handle the call. He treated me like he treats other clients, and I gave him what I give the bank, precise answers and a copy of every document they requested, plus one they didn't. It shocks a banker into comfort when you give them more than they asked for. There was a day late in January when it was too cold to think and just warm enough to rain. I was at Eastwood in a sweater that had outlived several nicer women when Ray called my name with the urgency of a man whose eyebrows had just turned to ice. The shut-off valve in the north stairwell had failed. Water was coming down like the heavens had stubbed a toe. Manny and the new guy, Nate, were already elbow-deep in it, swearing softly the way men who respect you swear. I called Lila and said, "If you ever wanted to see what this work is, put on boots." She arrived in boots that had never had to be braved before. Within 15 minutes, she had soaked hair plastered to her skull and that look on her face you get when you understand something for the first time and also forever. We bailed and soaked and lugged until the water hesitated, then surrendered. Manny slapped the valve like it was a stubborn relative. "Behave," he said. Lila leaned against the cinder block wall, breathing like someone who had just run back from the part of herself that was a child. I used to think buildings were pretty or ugly. I never thought about whether they were kind. Kind is a word you can apply to wood. Some wood wants to help you, some wood has other ideas. She laughed. It startled both of us. 2 weeks later, we sat on milk crates in a unit where the light fell in like forgiveness and ate deli sandwiches on napkins because the counters were clean and still smelled like oranges. Lila said, "I almost bought a purse today." The words spilled out fast and hot. It was $300. The salesman said it would last forever and make me feel pulled together like you'd never guess what kind of day I was having. I carried it around the store, and then I put it back so hard on the table the handles jumped. I wanted to cry, and then I wanted to punch somebody, and then I wanted to call you. $300 is a copay, a water heater repair, half a month of groceries, or 3 purses, depending on the math you like. I didn't buy it. That's the part you can celebrate. She chewed. She breathed. "I pick the wrong things when I'm scared," she said again, and I nodded because repetition is how we tell the truth we mean. There are always people on the edge of a story who change it without stepping into the scene. Lila's bridesmaid posted a video from the VFW apology with a caption that made it sound like a reality show cutscene. There were comments about class and people who shop at Goodwill that would have made better women angry. Lila saw it, told me, and then did something I did not know she was capable of. She did not engage. She sent the woman a private message. "I meant my apology. I won't use it for drama." The bridesmaid took down the video. The comment shriveled in the daylight. In late March, the Dayton Daily News printed a small piece about the Eastwood project and used a picture where I looked like I'd rather be holding a tarp. The reporter quoted the mayor and someone from the city's housing office, and on a second line quoted a tenant who had a key already lying hot in his palm. He said, "My boy's going to have a room with a door that latches."
Arthur cut the clipping and mailed it to me with a note that said, "This is why we lend." I put it on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a cow, because even bankers need a little country to keep them gentle.
April brought mud and a site meeting where the inspector rejected our stair rail height. It is one of those details that separates a safe fall from a lawsuit, and we fixed it that day because we hire people who do not need new instructions to do their job. Leela brought donuts on Wednesday like she had promised, and Ray said, "Is this going to be a thing?" And when she said yes, he said, "All right then," like a man making room at his table. At the Haven, Leela learned the names of women who tell their stories in a different order than most people do. She folded sheets until her wrists ached and met a little boy named Lucas who would only listen to Pete the cat if you changed your voice for each character. She told me about a woman the shelter helped get a restraining order, and we ate meatloaf at my small kitchen table, and Leela cried the kind of tears that make a sound like a sink finishing its swallow. Evan, to his credit, did not flinch at the changes. He found a junior accounting job at a firm that does more taxes than talk, and when his father offered to float them a loan, he said, "We have to work this through ourselves, or we'll be 50 and still not know how to be poor without panicking." That answer cost him, because some families save their love in the bank. Arthur didn't push. He sat with his wife in their living room and watched a show where people fix up houses they would never pick for themselves, and he wondered what his son was learning that he had forgotten to teach. The bank audit came and went with the small dramas that make auditors feel alive. There was a missing signature in a file that turned out not to be missing. It had been stuck to the back of another document, like paper trying to cuddle. There was a calculation somebody wanted on a different line. There was a moment where a young analyst confused lean priority with lean perfection and blushed so hard her ears turned interesting. Through it all, Arthur stayed out of my hair. He sent one email that said, "We appreciate your thoroughness," which in banker is the equivalent of applause. One night in May, the power went out in my building. I lit a candle that makes my whole apartment smell like someone wants to come home, and I looked at Tom's badge in the flame's light. I said, "She is trying." And the words felt like the smallest door in the world opening. I fell asleep on the couch and dreamed about a house that used to leak and then stopped. June was the ribbon on a pair of scissors. The banner over the stage at Eastwood read, "Eastwood Commons, opening soon," in letters large enough to be embarrassing. The mayor came in a suit that looked like it could hold him up if he fell. There were the expected people from the city and a reporter who had brought a photographer with patience. We gave keys to 3 families first because the air conditioners had lost their minds and then found them again. And a few units were ready in a way most units were not. One of the families was Tanya, who had been living in a motel with 2 kids and an alarm clock set to go off every 3 hours so she could check that the door was still locked. She hugged me with arms like a promise and said, "I can breathe." And I stood very still because moments like that blow through your ribs like a weather front. When it was my turn at the microphone, I talked the way I like to hear other people talk, shorter than they think they should and true. I said, "My name is Margaret. People call me Maggie. And I run a stubborn company that fixes buildings and tries very hard not to make a mess of people." I said a lot of folks helped: construction crews that know how to hold the heavy end of a day, city workers who picked up their phones even when they were at lunch, bankers who answer after hours. I looked at Arthur and he looked at his shoes. I said, "If you're wondering why a woman in a thrift store dress sometimes signs checks with a lot of zeros, it's because this town gave me 1,000 second chances when I couldn't afford the first one. And it's because roofs and windows are more honest than a lot of the people I've met."
I turned a little and said, without looking right at her, that when we do harm in public, sometimes we have to heal in public too. Leela's eyes were already bright, but she smiled, not the smile of a person in a photograph, the smile of a person who knows they are not the center of the picture and likes it that way.
After the speeches, a boy with a new key clutched in his fist ran his hand along the hallway wall like he was petting the building. Lila crouched and told him the paint will be dry by morning, and he nodded very seriously and told her the color looked like cereal milk. It did. That night, at my kitchen table with the lemon bar napkin folded under my teacup, I drafted papers for a small fellowship fund that would pay community college tuition for adults who work in and around our buildings. Janitors, aides, cashiers, the sorts of people who keep a city in one piece and get thanked only with a wave. The only rule was that the person who accepted had to bring someone else to enroll. Help is a relay, not a trophy. I named one after Tom because heroism is quieter than we sell it, and one after my daughter because redemption should get a plaque. In July, Lila came over with a bag of groceries because she's learned one of the small loves of adulthood, feeding the person who taught you the taste of food. She put eggs and bread and a cantaloupe in my fridge. I cut the cantaloupe the way my mother taught me, with a knife that had been sharpened recently. We ate with salt because fruit can stand up to it. She said, "There's something I haven't told you." She took a breath that sounded like courage pretending to be regular air. "My Evan and I are fine. Better than fine," she corrected. "Different. We're learning. We fight about money and not about what money pretends to be. He gets nervous and walks around the kitchen in circles. I get quiet. Then we sit down and do the math. Doing the math is making us honest. Math has a way of humiliating without being cruel," I said. She smiled. "There's another thing." She leaned forward, elbows on my table, which is a kind of intimacy. "You know how you said I pick the wrong things when I'm scared? I found a way to pick better. I started a list on my phone of small things I can do when I feel that old heat climb my face. The first item is call mom. The second is leave the store. The third is make coffee and drink water in that order. The fourth is go fold towels at the Haven." "You made a list," I said, and felt something inside me laugh the way an open window laughs at a breeze. She took my hand. The scar where my ring once sat is white and small and sometimes catches the light. Lila traced it. She said, "I know you think you didn't teach me the things you know, but I was there. I saw you fix with what you had. I saw you put dignity on the counter like a plate we always ate from. I didn't know, but I saw." I have a rule about crying. I don't do it in rooms where I can smell bleach or concrete dust. I keep it for quiet places that smell like fruit. I cried then. In August, a storm came up from the west like someone had shaken a rug. The kind of thunder that checks whether your windows are properly installed shook the building. It was a Wednesday. Lila showed up with donuts in a plastic box beaded with humidity. The guys took their usual ones without looking. Ray, apple fritter. Manny, glazed. Nate, with an optimism I admire, choosing the sprinkle one that always looks better than it tastes. The lights flickered, sat down, stood back up. We watched the rain move across the parking lot like it had somewhere else to be. Tanya came by because her sink had started a new habit and she thought we might talk it out of it. Lila got under the cabinet with a flashlight. Manny said, "You'll mess up your hair," the old joke he only makes now because he knows she will laugh. Lila laughed. Her hair was already a mess. School started and there were book drives and backpack giveaways and the kind of ordinary commotion a city makes when its children remember their sizes have changed. The Hathen needed more hands. Lila picked up an extra shift on Mondays and told me her favorite thing was labeling plastic bins in a closet. She said it made her feel like a librarian at the edge of an emergency, which is some of us are. In September, the bank's risk committee asked for one more meeting to talk about future phases of Eastwood and what the market wanted and whether we were sleepy about a recession. I brought charts printed on paper because charts on screens make people think they can change the numbers by leaning. Arthur sat still and asked 2 good questions. After the meeting, he walked me to the elevator and said, "My wife and I would like to have you over for dinner if that wouldn't ruin our reputations."
I'll bring lemon bars, I said.
At their house, which was the sort of tidy you get from a woman who can make a bed so tight the sheets look like they've been ironed while they slept, we ate roast chicken and green beans with more garlic than is polite. Mrs. West, Linda, told me she teaches second grade and that the only thing that beats her is glitter. She said, "I've thought badly of you for years without knowing you." I said, "That's all right. I thought badly of you too, on principle." We laughed like women who understand that our husbands were not the point of the story anyway. October returned before anyone had truly adjusted to the idea of September, and I found myself in a church basement at a potluck where every casserole contained a secret particular to the cook. There is no neutral mac and cheese. Each one tells you if the woman who made it trusts butter more than milk. Lila waved at me from across the room and patted the seat next to her like she was saving it just for me. I sat. People do this at potlucks. They place you. It is a holy act. A young bride with a ring that flashed with more confidence than she had leaned toward Lila and said, "I wish my mom and I were close," a confession disguised as a compliment. Lila glanced at me and then said, "We're practicing." Practice means you show up on the days you don't feel like it. It means you apologize without but. It means you bring donuts on Wednesdays even if the road to the site is down to one lane and every light is red. On the way home, I rolled my window down even though the air had turned sharp. I said out loud into the night, "We're practicing." And the city, which is full of ghosts and gutters and groceries and girls who have learned how to mean it, said, "Good." There were still hard pieces. One afternoon, Evan had a setback at work, and Lila texted me a picture of a receipt with numbers that made my stomach tilt. She had relapsed into the kind of shopping that means you've picked panic as your plan. I put my coat on and drove to their apartment with cash and judgment, and then left the judgment in my glove compartment because it wasn't going to help. We sat at their table and did the math again. We took the item back to the store, and the girl at the counter asked if there was anything wrong with it. Lila said, "Just everything outside of it." And the girl said, "I know that one," and processed the return without pointing for a manager. It felt like a small new world. When the 6-month mark from the wedding hit, Lila had paid $90,000 toward her debts. I matched her penny for penny. I wrote the check slowly because I wanted to feel it. She took it from me like it weighed what it did. We embrace the way you do when your bodies have learned who they are to each other again. A week later, we sat on my couch with the cat from down the hall snoring like a small motorcycle between us, and Lila said, "I keep thinking about the sentence you said at the ribbon cutting, the one about harm and healing in public." I said it's a rule I made up on the count of the fact that I've known too many people who want to heal in private because harm is so showy. You don't have to live in public, but when you break something in public, you have to show up there for the repair. She nodded. She said, "I've been trying to figure out what respect is, not the kind we post about, the kind you can eat." She looked at me, a little frightened of her own next words. She said, "I think it's not a tip you leave when the service was good. It's how you set the table every day." I said, "You stole that from me, but you can have it." She laughed, and the cat woke up offended and then forgave us. Winter came back with its old apron on and its list of chores. The furnace at Eastwood wheezed, we coasted, it signed a truce. One of the tenants fell behind because her mother got sick, and I remembered the task of being human might be to hold one corner of someone's life while they adjust their grip.
We worked out a plan. People like to say no one gives you anything. Those people have not looked around. I got called to the county courthouse to sign something that had to be notarized by a woman who keeps a potted plant on her desk that is either dying slowly or thriving in a way we don't understand. The clerk with the sweater said, "My daughter is moving into one of your apartments." She blushed as if there was shame in saying something ordinary. I told her there isn't. Ordinary is the goal.
There was a day in January when the sun shone like it had won a prize, and I took Leela to a building I hadn't shown her yet. It was smaller than Eastwood and uglier, and in the ghost of a neighborhood that used to cheer on bowling teams. We walked through rooms that smelled like every kind of failure. "Why this one?" she asked. "Because it has good bones," I said, "and because I can see what will happen here. I can't tell you how. It's not magic. It's math and stubbornness and a love for things other people call ruined." We stood in a kitchen where the sink was not where a sink should be. She reached out and touched the wall with the back of her hand. "Tom used to do that," I said, and the sentence surprised me. He used to feel surfaces with the back of his hand to see if heat had collected there. He said palms lie to you. She smiled and used the back of her hand, and it felt like putting a picture back in its frame. On the way out, she held the door for a woman coming in to look around. The woman nodded and said, "You the landlord?" She said it the way you say, "You the person I will blame if this goes wrong?" "I'm the person who will answer the phone." That's close. We worked there 3 mornings a week through spring, and by Memorial Day it smelt like soap and possibility instead of dampness from a time before now. I planted marigolds because the deer don't like them, and hoped the neighborhood dogs had better manners than the last time. Tanya stopped by with a plate of cookies that tasted like someone cared about everything. She said, "I heard what you said at the ribbon cutting about not making a mess of people. I think about it when I want to yell at my kids. I don't always stop, but the sentence sits there like a speed bump. I hit speed bumps too. I'm just glad they're there." In June, the fellowship fund paid its first 2 tuitions. One was for a janitor at a hospital who had been out of school longer than I've owned my favorite spoon. She cried in the office of the registrar because crying is what you do when someone hands you a key to a door you had given up on. The other was for a cashier at a grocery store who signed her name very carefully on the line that said she promised to show up. She brought her cousin with her like the rules required, and they took a picture outside the building in front of a bush that needed trimming. I stood back and didn't ask to be in the photo. Not every good thing needs your face on it to be true. By July, a year after the wedding, the story had taken the shape it was supposed to take. It is a mistake to think stories are wild. They have bones and they have a heart, just like buildings. When you align the bones and the heart, the thing stands. People think drama is the point. Drama is a tool. The point is the standing. On the anniversary of the wedding, I ironed my Goodwill dress because it fit again and because I had a speech that did not require a stage. I invited Arthur and Linda and Leela and Evan to my apartment, which is a place built for 4 people if they like each other. I made lasagna because if someone cannot be happy with lasagna, you can move on without guilt. I poured iced tea into cups that do not match and put Tom's badge on the table next to the salt, like a centerpiece for people who know what it means to keep things. We ate. We told the story of the water valve again and of the kid who thought the hallway looked like cereal milk and of the day Leela returned the purse. We laughed like people who picked each other. When the plates were pushed away and the tea had gone warm, I stood and said, "I have something to tell you." My knees know how to hold me, but I still braced myself on the chair. I changed my will last year because I was angry. I made decisions with a fist around my heart. I'm changing it again. Leela shook her head before I could finish. "Mom, we don't want your money."
It's not about wanting. It's about using. I handed them a piece of paper that did not need a notary yet because what it said fit in our mouths without other people's pens. Most of what I have will go to the fund that pays for apartments and tuition and refrigerators that work. That part is not changing. But the running of it, the care and feeding, will be done by people who learned how to be poor without panicking and how to be solvent without superiority.